Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. It's episode 240, and this week I'm going home. Yes, it's an introduction to investing in the North.
Yes, it is indeed, and we're very lucky to have a real-life Northerner on the show with us today, Mr. Rob B, who's going to guide us through some of the areas, but I'm going to have a crack as well, because I have actually been there. In fact, Rob, we were in the North together just yesterday.
We were. It was a brilliant day, really good day. Loads of exciting things happened, and we can't tell you any of it, which is very typical of us. There's loads happening at the moment. Rob and I are seeing lots of each other, and we're still getting on, which is great. And it's not just because we enjoy each other's company. It's because we're working on actually multiple big projects at the moment. So much happening, so much we're desperate to tell you about. And it won't be long before we can. But all I can say is we're just a little bit more excitable than we normally are, and that's a pretty high level anyway.
Yep, a whole load of excitability. But we'd better move on, because otherwise we'll just have to keep saying that we're really excited because we can't get on to the next bit, which is why. But we will get you there soon, we promise. But for now, let's move on to our news story this week. This is from the BBC, and the headline is, "Are longer mortgages the answer to high property prices?"
Okay, so this article from the BBC says, are mortgages the answer to high property prices? Or you could change it to, which is probably more appropriate, the cause of high property prices. Really interesting article, and it goes on to give you some case studies here. Now, this certainly isn't the one cause of higher property prices, but Rob, they do make an interesting point and an interesting case.
Yeah, they're approaching it from a very different angle from how I would look at this. So in the article, there's lots of case studies of first-time buyers who are taking out 40-year mortgages. The number of 35 and 40-year mortgages is massively up on what it has been in the past. And in these case studies, they're talking to people who are saying, this is great because I've got a longer term, my payment's been reduced, therefore I can afford to buy a house when I couldn't before, which is entirely true. But the other way of looking at this is, this actually supports high prices. So we touched on this really briefly on the webinar that we had the other week for magazine subscribers. So if you subscribe to the magazine and you didn't catch that, you can go onto your Property Hub account and watch that again. We were talking about what might cause the boom in the second part of the cycle, because people say, well, affordability is so stretched already. How can there be further growth? This is part of the answer, I think. Yes, one thing that could happen is that property prices could drop, and at some point, of course, inevitably that will have to happen. But before that happens, they could go up even further because of mortgage constraints being relaxed. So 40-year terms, the return of 100% mortgages. It might sound like, oh, well, that's surely never going to happen because they're still trying to sort out the mess from last time. But I think you might be surprised by how short memories are.
And while affordability may be stretched in the south and the southeast, it's forced us north and forced our attention north this week, where affordability is still pretty reasonable. So this week's topic is an intro to the North. Good job it's an intro, Rob, because we could do a podcast on the North, but this is just a very basic intro to whet people's appetites, to give them a basic understanding of what's happening.
Yep, and if you find this useful, let us know, because we could always go into more depth in any of the areas that we talk about, or indeed areas we haven't talked about. But now seems like the right time to do an intro, because so many people are looking to the North and the Midlands when choosing to invest in property. We get to see it because we talk to so many people. You really see these themes. A couple of years ago, almost everyone who was living in London was looking to invest in or around London. Then there was a period of time where everyone seemed to be saying, well, I really want to invest in London, but should I? The returns are better further north, but I don't know anything about it. And they're a bit torn on it. And now the default is pretty much, well, obviously I can't afford London, so I'm going to go north. So many people are doing that now. But all those people, despite the fact that that decision's almost been made for them, a lot of them have never lived in those regions and don't really know where to start. They've heard us talking about the North. They're persuaded, but that's a big place. So today we're going to break down the monolithic North into some sort of different areas and talk about their relative strengths and what they have to offer. And a lot of this is taken from a very handy free Northern Powerhouse document that RMP Property is giving away. And there's going to be a link to that later so you can get your copy. So we've been talking about the North quite a lot recently, but we're not the only ones. George Osborne, for many of the other things that he did, one of the things that he did was rebrand the North as the Northern Powerhouse. So we're probably going to be talking about that a little bit today. But when we talk about the Northern Powerhouse or the North, Rob, what are we actually talking about? Where are we drawing the lines here?
Okay, I think this is important. So it's not a physical entity. If you put into Google, the North. I doubt it'll give you a boundary, but basically, whether you look at the North or the Northern Powerhouse, it's a collection of projects, investments focused on regions in the north of England. And some of those regions you'll be more than familiar with. It includes places like Liverpool, Manchester, Sheffield, Hull, West Yorkshire, and the one that's often forgotten and a little unfairly, the North East. In total, it's home to around about 15 million people. Now, you can compare that to London and its population of just short of 9 million. You get an understanding of why George Osborne's trying to bring these places together, because as a collective, by unifying them, they'll be a much more powerful entity. And if the North or the Northern Powerhouse achieves its vision of better connectivity and them working together, it will become a serious rival for its southeast or southern cousins, providing an interesting market for property investors. And as Rob's said, people are already seeing that. People are going there anyway because the yields are far more attractive, that property prices have only just started to move, so there's a lot of potential upside there. But with this regen happening in parallel with it, it makes it a place that is not just getting our attention, your attention, but generally the press's attention generally as well. So lots of people are talking about it. But I feel it'd be helpful if we dipped into some of the key areas to give you a flavour, at least a very much a beginner's guide to some of those key regions we just mentioned.
Okay, let's do that. And let's start with what I think, Rob, you were the first person to say this, calling Manchester the London of the North. It's actually quite an apt description. Everyone's aware of Manchester. That's almost like the default place where it's like, well, can't get into London, go to Manchester. There are good reasons for that. It's the UK's fastest growing city. There's loads going on there. It's got the biggest regeneration projects outside the capital. It's also got the largest economy outside London and the southeast. And it really is booming. In terms of property prices, if you look at the Home Track Index of the 20 main UK cities, it's topping the table and has been all year. So prices are on the rise. Still, though, it offers yields that are double what you get in London. So this is why it's so attractive. The yields are twice as good as London, but it's got so much of the same demand characteristics in terms of its economy and its rental demand and so on. Very popular with investors. Over a quarter of Manchester's housing stock is made up of buy-to-lets, which is the highest proportion in Britain. So you might think, oh, well, if there's a lot of supply, is the demand there? Well, it definitely is. There's a real rental boom as well. There's a massive student population. Graduates tend to stay on. It's got the highest proportion of 25 to 29-year-olds in the whole of the UK. So if you put all those things together, you've got attractive yields, growing prices, high tenant demand from the types of tenant that you'd really want to have. And the investment story is really strong. It does, however, rain all the time.
It does rain all the time. But don't worry, you're not going there for your holidays. A place you may want to, though, a fabulous place you may want to go for your holiday is Liverpool. Oh, funny how I got this one, Rob. So, Liverpool's housing market is really thriving at the moment, and we definitely expect this to continue. Absolutely behind Manchester in the curve at the moment. You know, Manchester is further ahead than all the other places in the north in terms of property terms and economic terms, you could say as well. However, places like Liverpool and others we'll mention today are definitely stepping up in their own right, not just benefiting from the Manchester effect, but strong cities in their own right. And it's no surprise, you know, Liverpool has a very large workforce and compared to many areas across the UK, inexpensive as well. Nearly 250,000 people. A lot of companies are relocating to Liverpool. A lot of jobs are being created there as well. And long-term lets is high as new employers are moving to the area. One of the main driving forces in the Liverpool property market comes from the student population, with 6 out of 10 students seek to stay in the city and work there after graduation, which is huge because Liverpool's student population, is a very, very big one. They've got at least 3 universities there, 4 if you include LIPA, which is the Paul McCartney one. But basically what I'm getting at is that, you know, Manchester's got a huge student population, but so is Liverpool. And like Manchester, those students really love living there and want to stay on afterwards. For property investors, this means that you've got this young professional workforce that's growing this city's population year after year. And another thing to watch out for, one for the future, is Liverpool Waters. It's a huge regen project from the Peel Group. Now, some people are sceptical of regen projects. Oh, will it ever get off the ground? The Peel Group are a huge company and have got great pedigree when it comes to regen projects. They did Salford Quays, they did the Trafford Centre. So they're not one of these companies that throws up grand plans and don't deliver. So maybe Google Liverpool Waters and Wirral Waters, which is just over the other side of the Mersey, if you're interested in learning more. Few key stats for you on Liverpool. Fastest growing economy in the UK right now. More than 5 billion of investment has gone in the last decade. You know, I grew up in Liverpool in the 80s, and I can tell you it's a very different city today than it was back then. Same great people, but it's a lot smarter, and it's a city that people are really proud to show off now. Definitely go there for a weekend. I know I'm biased, but it is a wonderful weekend away. Rob, I know you're a fan too, and that's not just because you're being nice to me. And finally, commuter footfall expected to double by 2043. As we said, that population rising all the time, young workforce coming into the city. It's definitely one of these cities one to watch. Talking about before, Rob, where we said Manchester as the London of the North, there was a survey I read in the last couple of weeks where people of different regions were asked to name the second city. So people from Manchester named Manchester as the second city. People from Birmingham listed Birmingham as the second city. People of Leeds listed Leeds, that they were the second city. The people of Liverpool, they put London as the second city.
Ah, I like that. Very cool.
So very proud people.
That's awesome. And yeah, there is a strong investment case, and it is a very nice place for a weekend trip as well. So yeah, lots going for Liverpool, and because it's so well known worldwide, there's so much overseas investment there, because Manchester and Liverpool, they're probably the big ones because of their history that people around the world have heard of. The next city we're going to look at is Sheffield, which has also got a great history, probably not as well known as an investment case. If we'd asked you before this episode to sort of mention places in the north where you think there might be strong investment cases, you probably would have said Manchester first. Second, you would have said either Liverpool or Leeds, which we'll come to shortly. Sheffield's probably a step behind in terms of perception, but it's still got a lot going for it. And it is popular with property investors. I know quite a few people who invest in Sheffield. There's quite a mix of housing stock in Sheffield as well. I know people who do city centre flats there. I know people who've got very high yielding terraced houses there. There's a real mix. And because it's a favourite with investors, demand is outweighing supply at the moment. And that's only going to continue as the city grows. Again, lots of regeneration and investment planned in Sheffield. And much like Manchester, we can expect to see rental demand increasing for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's graduates, lots of them staying on because the house prices are reasonable and there are lots of job opportunities. But also, as things grow and as things change, you're probably going to see people moving across from areas that are deemed more expensive, such as Leeds and Manchester. So Sheffield could be the beneficiary of some of that ripple effect that we tend to see. So in Sheffield, loads of demand, very popular with investors, surprisingly high yield. The S1 postcode, which is the city centre, offers one of the best returns in the UK, one of the highest yields, which is surprising. It's up there. And also, this is what would seal the deal for me. It's one of the UK's first gigabit cities, which means it's got faster broadband than anywhere else. I'm in.
I'm surprised you haven't moved, Rob.
Well, now I know. I might be adding to some of that demand up there. Definitely tempted. But somewhere else that would tempt me is West Yorkshire. I'm a really big fan of the West Yorkshire region. So lots going on there. There's Leeds, of course, and there's a few other areas as well that we should touch on.
Yeah, I'm a big fan too. Lived in Leeds for a while. Love the city. Great place. Lots going for it from an investment point of view before. You often hear us talk about, with no surprise really, sort of Manchester and then Liverpool and Leeds sort of flanking at either side, which it does geographically, but kind of does economically as well. But like Liverpool, Leeds and the surrounding areas should be talked about in their own right. So let's start with Leeds. Leeds has a booming economy. Like Liverpool and Manchester, very large student population. Again, you've got at least 3 universities there, 3 major universities there. Bradford, just outside of Leeds, only down the road, has a very good university as well. Bradford's prices obviously a lot lower than Leeds, and the yields can be a bit higher there. So if you're looking for a bit of yield, then Bradford maybe you want to watch. If you're looking for capital growth sooner rather than later, I would imagine Leeds is going to go first, but we'll see. And other significant locations within the region, look out for Wakefield, Halifax, Huddersfield. These are all like satellite towns that hover round Leeds. All will benefit from the ripple effect. West Yorkshire has a strong, skilled workforce, a lot of money, a lot of wealth in West Yorkshire, a lot of investment going in there, understandably, as well. One of the things that seems to attract people to West Yorkshire is the lifestyle. Lots of people love that they can get into Leeds, but many people live outside in these commuter areas that I just mentioned and take advantage of the absolute wonderful setting the Pennines offers. Really good work-life balance, often scores highly in those surveys that you see about best places to live and so on. A few key stats for you on the area. Home to the wealthiest city in the north, Leeds. Not many people know that, but yeah, as I touched on earlier, very wealthy, the city of Leeds, and biggest financial centre currently outside of London as well in the UK. Again, not known by most people. And the Leeds Bradford population, like some of the other areas we've talked about, because of all this regen and because of all this positive news, is expected to increase by 28% by 2033. So that's a huge, huge increase in such a short period of time. So plenty going on in the West Yorkshire region. And plenty going on everywhere, Rob. And that's it. No, it isn't. Because the one area that tends to get missed off the list, and I think a little unfairly, because the proud people up there, and you've got a lot to be proud about too, is the North East.
Yeah, the Northeast is a fantastic place as well. It's really interesting in terms of investment. Important to get it right. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we wrap up in a minute. But if you do invest in the Northeast, what can you expect? Well, you're probably thinking high yields. And if you are thinking that, you're correct. The yields compared with the Southeast and even compared with the rest of the North can be very high. The reason for that is that house prices are still depressed compared with where they were before the last crash. It's really interesting if you look at the patterns of where growth has happened over the last 10 years or so. London and the Southeast bounced back first, followed by the Midlands and Manchester, followed by other places in the North. And then there's a few places that are really lagging. One of those is Wales. The other is the Northeast. And because rents haven't really fallen that much, it means that the yields are very high. It also means that there's a high expectation of price growth. Now, of course, that's only going to happen if the fundamentals support it. And it seems like the ingredients are in place. The population in the Northeast is increasing, and its graduate retention rate, something we've talked about a few times already, is very high, which means young people are staying there. And when they stay there, to start off with at least, they're going to be staying in the rental market. And I think this is great. I think it's really harmful, actually, that so much economic focus is on London. And certainly over the last 10 years, a lot of people who I've met have studied in various places around the UK, originally came from various places around the UK and came to London to find work just because that's what you do. And that's not happening so much anymore. And I think that's a really good thing. The Northeast economy is really strong. The transport links are great. Lots of businesses are moving to the area and creating jobs, which in turn is driving the rental demand even further. This, of course, is great news for property investors. So it's the furthest away, if you are from the Southeast, of all the regions we've talked about. It's the one you probably know least about. It's possibly the riskiest, and we'll talk about how to control that in a minute. But I do think there's a lot of potential. A few stats to wrap it up. It's got the highest rates of employment growth in the country. It's got really high annual gross yields, as I've talked about.
Yeah, you're on the move again, Rob.
I'm on the move again. I'd only just got to Sheffield, but I've just read that it's got huge investments in digital infrastructure. I'm off.
Well, you do like to travel. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a flavour. You know, as we said, Rob touched on earlier, we could go into so much more depth. And if you are keen for us to do more, then let us know. We can really go to town on this in different areas. We're going to look at the Midlands in weeks to come as well. We'll definitely cover that and some of the regions you should be paying attention to. But before we move on to some of the bits and pieces we normally do, there's a few important things to take away from this. Now, if you are completely new, get confidence. And by getting confidence, there's different things you could do to approach this. A really simple win, and I'm amazed that more people don't do this one, Rob, but is visit a meetup in an area that you're interested in. We've got them all over the place, Property Hub meetups. Pretty much in every place we've mentioned today, maybe a few exceptions, but pretty much every one there, we've got a Property Hub meetup. They're free to go to, and they're full of friendly people who love talking about the areas they invest in. So get along to one, take advantage of it, meet the locals, understand what they're doing in the area, get the do's and the don'ts. You're not going to get better advice.
Yeah, I think that's such a great tip. I've been to so many of the meetups now around the country, and every time I go to one, I learn so much about an area. A lot of the time, I'm sort of standing there getting Google Maps up on my phone to look at the areas they're talking about, and it's the kind of knowledge that would take you forever to actually learn for yourself. If you go along there, you can speak to people who are doing it, you can build your network as well. It's such an easy way of getting started. And it's really important to build that knowledge, because there's a mistake that a lot of people make when they sort of go from, especially from the Southeast, to investing in the North, because they'll go there and they'll look at the prices and they'll go, oh my God, everything's so cheap. And then if they don't have any knowledge, they'll think, well, I might as well just go for the cheapest that I can find. It's all cheap, but why wouldn't I go for the cheapest? If you do, you could easily find yourself going into areas that are not the best. A great example of this is the Northeast. And I mentioned it's one of the riskier areas to invest in. Why is it risky? Well, it's not if you have the knowledge, but if you don't have the knowledge, you could very easily find yourself investing in areas that are not going to benefit from all the advantages that we talked about for quite a while yet. There are some areas there that are really growing strongly and they've got a lot going for them. There are others that are still very much challenged. There are strategies that work in those areas, but if you're looking for an easy ride of it, you're looking for some potential growth, you will be disappointed. So the headline there is don't go too cheap. And the way to find out how cheap is too cheap and to work out which areas you should be in is to get along to those meetups and get that local knowledge, and also to work with experts.
Yeah, experts could be the people in the meetups, or it could be estate agents in the area, or it could be letting agents in the area, or it could be property investment companies that specialise in those areas. There's no one way. There's lots of ways to find experts. You don't have to just do one of that. You could do all of those, but you could do some of those. But if you're not an expert, why not just work with people who know the North a lot better than you? And as I've just listed, there's plenty of people. There's 15 million Northerners, and pretty much all of them know the North better than the people who live outside of the North. So work with them, tap into their knowledge. Yes, you can do all the research, and podcasts like this will help. And it's not to say you'll be led blindly by these experts, but just take advantage of their knowledge and then make your own informed decisions. And then once you've done that, work with some experts to keep it managed, Rob.
Yeah, you're unlikely to want to self-manage if this is away from home for you. Maybe you'll want to, but for the majority of people listening to this podcast, I'd say that they want it to be a hands-off endeavour. So do the work up front. There's always going to be work to do, even if you're partnering up with other people to do some of the acquisition for you or to do the management for you. There's still going to be work. You still need to put the research in. If you're working with people or companies, you need to put the effort in researching those companies, and you need to educate yourself to a point where you're able to validate what you're being told. But once you get to that point and you've made the acquisition, get your property managed. Get it managed by people who know the area, who do lots of business there, who can keep it ticking over for you. That will cost you a bit of money, yes, but it'll also save you so much time when something goes wrong and you'd otherwise spend your whole day ringing around different people trying to find someone in an area you're not familiar with and you don't have contact. That's going to take a lot of time. So get that taken off your hands.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed your journey to the North. None of us got wet, which was good. And HS2 will get you back quickly. Well, in the future anyway. We're going to give you the info for getting this free guide that we mentioned, and we'll let you know what's coming up next week. But before we do, Rob, I think it's time to acknowledge some fantastic human beings.
I think it is. Let's do it.
Okay, so a huge thank you to TDR. TDR says, love Rob and Rob's podcast. They're really informative and everything is explained in a clear and concise way. They have useful spreadsheets and resources on their website too. 5 stars. And Matt says, I actually look forward to my long commute thanks to Rob and Rob. I love everything property related, so I was delighted when I came across this podcast, and I was hooked immediately. I really like Rob and Rob's straightforward attitude towards property investing. They don't pretend that it's some get-rich-quick scheme that will make you millionaires in one deal. Instead, they provide good, practical advice to help your property investment journey, whatever stage you may be at. The content is relevant, useful, and very well presented. They don't hide the bad bits, they tell it like it is, and they give an insight into their own personal ups and downs. I really hope the gents are able to continue their good work for many years to come. If you're interested in property, listening to this podcast is a must. Thank you, Matt. We're making people's commutes pleasurable, Bob. Wow, that's some achievement.
Yeah, lowering blood pressure all over the country, I like to think. That's awesome. What a lovely pair of reviews. Thank you so much for those. We really appreciate it. And we will give back in the form of a resource of the week. And this week, Rob, it's a resource that you've actually put together. Or maybe I'm giving you too much credit. Your team has put together.
Yeah, I've done none of this. But I'm sure they tapped into some of my knowledge in some form or the other. Yeah, to grab this free guide, no catches, go to this webpage and get it emailed to you. It's thepropertyhub.net/power. So if you've enjoyed this episode, but you want more, we've whetted your appetite, but now you're hungry for more Northern knowledge, then go to thepropertyhub.net/power and download your free copy of a Northern Powerhouse guide there. Loads and loads more detail there so you can continue your research. And as we said, it's empowering yourself with the knowledge that will make you a better investor. And Rob, we'll make sure we continue that trend by another podcast next week.
Yeah, of course, we're going to be back next week. And we've got another of those topics where we go, how have we not talked about this before? It's really interesting because we never sat around to plan out 240 episodes of our podcast before we started. We find ourselves jumping around and we find ourselves thinking that we've covered all the sort of beginnery topics, but then we come across something that we missed. And so, in fact, if you go onto the website, thepropertyhub.net/podcast, there are really handy categories on there. So you can filter down to the beginner ones, if that's the stage you're at, the more advanced ones, if that's the stage you're at, and different topic areas as well. One of the beginner ones that we just never did was an industry jargon guide. Really, we should have done this earlier because we've been using all these acronyms and all these words that just don't really exist outside property. If you haven't had these explained to you, there's no particular reason why you should know what they mean. I've had more than one person say to me that they thought a BTL was a sandwich, but no, it's not. It's a property-specific term, and there's a lot of them, and we're going to be explaining what they all are next week.
It's not a sandwich? Well, I better turn up next week then, because I've just been getting hungry every time people have been talking about it. Right, next week, we will demystify a lot of those funny phrases, acronyms, and all the rest of it, and make life easier for you. And even if you know a bit about property, there's probably a few in there that you haven't come across, or you have, and you just haven't got the confidence to ask yourself, well, what does that mean? Next week, we'll solve that for you, so make sure you join us. And of course, we've got Ask Rob and Rob back on Tuesday, so make sure you tune in for that one too. But until then, you take care of yourself. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.